All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. Welcome to Web Wednesday, the show where we bring on people that are much smarter than me to chat about cool things web development. At least for me, uh, microservices is one of those phrases, one of those terms that I hear constantly, and I know that I'm supposed to know more about it, but I'm going to be honest. I don't. I know like the basic concepts. I know the basic patterns, but I have not done it near enough. And so, fortunately, today I'm thrilled to be joined once again by my old pal, my own partner in crime back in the MVA days. May MVA rest in peace, Jon Galloway. If you're not already familiar with Jon Galloway, Jon has been doing web dev, I think, for pretty much forever. Has been doing .NET for probably even longer than that. And before joining Microsoft, he graduated the Naval Academy, worked as a submariner, won The Price is Right. He's had a pretty cool life, and he's been kind enough to join us again today. So yeah, let's welcome on Jon here. If I can figure out how to move my cameras around. Yeah, Jon,
Oh,
welcome back.
thank you. Thanks so much. I mean, every Wednesday, I think today should be Web Wednesday, and so it was great today to actually be on Web Wednesday. I'm really happy to be here.
It's
Um,
thrilled to I'm like I said, I'm so thrilled to have you back on. It's always great just to hang out and chat and all of that good stuff.
yeah, yeah. Well, I have to start with the disclaimer because, like you said, I'm a .NET developer. I'm a web developer. I feel like microservices is a huge topic, and I'm definitely doing my best to learn as a .NET developer. But I would say I'm a .NET developer who can get by with some microservices, which I think is not a bad thing.
No, no, not at
But
all. That's
there's a
certainly
lot of moving parts.
that's
Yeah,
certainly better than I can do. But before we get into that, I've always wanted to ask you this question, so I'm going to put you a little bit
yeah,
on the spot here, because you were a submariner, and I have to admit, so I've got a little bit of claustrophobia. It doesn't really impact me on like normal day to day life, but it's certainly there. And I remember being in San Francisco where they have a World War II submarine, and so I went in and toured that, and of course we're sitting right there at the dock. We're not going anywhere. We're not underwater. And like even just that experience was enough for me to go, I don't know that I could do this. So I have to ask you, like, how did you manage like going underwater?
yeah. It's interesting. It's so I have the disclaimer is those submarines, the World War II era submarines, were smaller. Like they were really tight. And for I'm sure a lot of reasons, but one reason that modern submarines are bigger, especially like U.S. submarines, is because they're nuclear powered. And so the all the support systems and the pumps and the shielding and all that kind of stuff forces the modern submarines to be a lot bigger.
Okay.
So the spaces are bigger, and yet you still are in a tube underwater. And there were cases like, for instance, as an officer, they required this thing because every quirky like policy always goes back to something went wrong at some point. So we had somebody at some point had left a wrench or a bolt or something inside a tank when they were working on it, and then they went out to sea and there's all this rattling noise. So now the policy is an officer is required to close out every tank that's been opened up. So I had on a Saturday, I was the only officer on board, and they're like, "Hey, sir, we need somebody to close out this tank." I had to go in this tank, and it was one with all these baffles and stuff. Anyhow, I got stuck. I was stuck in this metal tank, and it took me a good minute to like figure out how to roll on my back and twist myself backwards and stuff. So there's plenty of tight moments. I don't know. You just get used to it.
No,
it was
no.
it was pretty bad. I was like, I don't even know. Like, there's a guy that's kind of paying attention. I could bang on the side, and they might be able, but I don't know what they would do. Yeah, I had plenty of tight fit moments where it was just like that's part of
Oh,
it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure at that point I would just give up my commission. Like, no, I'm good. It's been fun, guys.
I think part of what they do, and I think it's part of like what makes the military work in general, is they just keep you too tired to think about it. You know, like if you stop for a bit and thought about it, you'd be like, this is crazy. But I was just like, oh, okay, I'll do the next thing, you know. So
Oh, that's funny. That's absolutely hilarious. That's absolutely hilarious. Anyway, all right, cool. I've always wondered that, and I can't believe in all the years that I've known you, I've never stopped to ask you that question. So since I had you here, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start with this.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, too funny. All right, let's get into a little bit technical here, I guess. And let me ask kind of the very high level, maybe even just like obvious question, the one that maybe I should know, but I sort of do, but I mostly don't, which is, what is microservices? What does that mean? What is it?
Yeah, so I actually have a few slides
Okay.
that it's like all good slides, they're slides I've stolen. And these are slides from .NET Conf Focus on Microservices. But I think this really kind of illustrates it visually. So the idea is, back when I started with web development, we had like a prod server, and it was this huge multi-million-dollar machine. And if we wanted to upgrade to scale up, we needed to buy a new machine. And that was because the entire app was one big thing. It was a monolithic app. So what that means is when we deployed it, we copied the entire app to each server, right? And so the problems there's a lot of problems. One is that if you want to scale, you buy new hardware. You also are stuck with deployments, because if you want to do a deployment, it's all or nothing. So if you find one small little thing you want to fix, or you want to add one small new feature, you're redeploying the whole app and you risk breaking everything. So the move to microservices is this idea where, oops, I missed my cool animation. It's supposed to drag and drop those things. It's basically you break it apart. And so you're like, I can move each little bit of it independently. I can move the front end here, I can move the billing API there, I can move my logging service here, and you can deploy and scale them all separately. So that's really kind of the idea there.
Okay. All right. So it's basically just taking that monolith then that we had and breaking that down into smaller, maybe more logical components.
Exactly. And then as you do that, you get a lot more flexibility. So over time, we moved from everything was running on bare metal on these expensive servers. Then we started moving to VMs. And so if you look at a VM, you virtualize away the hardware. And so that gives you the ability to scale, but you're still running basically a whole virtual machine. So you're running operating system, all the binaries, all the stuff. And if you think about a VM of Windows, it includes Notepad and calc.exe and all that. So it all has to be serviced, and it's heavy, it's gigabytes to copy around and all that. So kind of the next bit of scale when we started moving to microservices is moving to containers. And with containers, you virtualize away the operating system as well. So what that means is you can really start just deploying tiny little applications, tiny little services, and they can be just, a few megabytes, under 100 megabytes, definitely. And then that lets you copy and move them around, and if one's misbehaving, you just kill it and redeploy it or restart it. You don't really care, right? Whereas restarting a whole server, you've got massive downtime, and you've got all these other kinds of things. So that's kind of the whole idea. Is like as you move over, now we can kind of just swap our containers around. We can say, here, let's spin it up, let's put some here. Like, we don't even care, right? So
Okay.
so it gives you all that kind of flexibility there.
Okay, so basically, then, so with a VM, that still needs to run inside of something, and it's going to be heavy, it's going to be bloated, and it's going to have like kind of everything that's there, and shutting that down, starting that up, moving that is a non-trivial task. But when we get down to a container, now I'm able to go, okay, well, here's one container, and this is going to contain my web app, and here's one container, and this is going to contain my database, and here's one container, and this is going to contain, some set of APIs. And so now I'm able to, maybe better deploy and better scale and more easily like move those around more easily, upgrade all of those.
Yeah, and now here's a really cool thing. What we've talked about so far is technical and IT focused, right?
Right.
But the real thing here is actually that's not the why. Like that's a cool nerdy IT thing, but really what microservices are about is more of a business thing. Because once we break these things apart, then we can be super agile, right? So instead of, like I talked about, we have to redeploy the entire app, now we can ship individual services, we can ship bug fixes. We can also scale down to work at the size of, they call it like a 2-pizza team. So the idea here is instead of like when I was first working on these, big applications on big servers, you'd have dozens and, maybe 100 people on a team, and you don't even know everybody. If you've got somebody that's new on a team, they're not even able to really have much of an impact. So this is a really cool quote from Brendan Burns, who's a co-founder of Kubernetes. He said it's really about scaling teams instead.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyhow, then you start thinking about, like as your teams scale up, you work at a smaller team, everyone knows each other, everyone knows the code they're working on, and you're able to like, empower individuals and teams. So like as a new developer on a team, I can very quickly feel like I understand the entire code base. I could, see myself moving up to being a team lead, et cetera. So that's my slides really, but that's kind of the why,
Okay.
So it's the, what are microservices and why do I even care about it?
So when we're talking then about microservices, are we really talking about things being containered, or are we also talking about serverless and Azure functions as well? So like and what might be the difference there?
Yeah. So, I mean, really, it does really kind of blur the lines. I feel like serverless is even kind of an evolution over from containers, because then you're able to work, you're going from the application size down to deploying a single function. And really, that's about as small as you get. You get smaller than that, you're deploying individual keywords, and that doesn't even make any sense. But
I'm just going to deploy the word let.
But really, the same practices and the same way of thinking, it's at that point it becomes so fluid, right? Because you end up working with something and you say, you know what, this thing was a service, but it's very easy to think about now. It's just a function on its own. And internally, like at Microsoft on the .NET website, we end up, working with this sort of thing. We've recently done some stuff with the .NET website where we're breaking things apart. We like, for instance, I love this stuff here. This is the live.net site. This is where we do all our different kind of shows and stuff. And this actually pulls from some things that run in Azure Functions. And I like pair programmed some of the original stuff for this with James Montemagno. And we did this as like some services. And then we just said, hey, this is a function, threw it up in Azure Functions, and it all just kind of, you can stitch it together. Because we're able to do that, the actual code that runs some of these things is small enough that James and I didn't have to understand the entire website. We could just work on building a little function. As long as our function returned the right stuff, nobody else even cared, right? So yeah, so it's really neat to be able to kind of stitch things together. And we were a 2-person team that was able to have an impact on this bigger website.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Code with Sean over on Twitch mentions that serverless is about implementation, just another piece of the architecture as opposed to just another brick in the wall, which is something
Hmm.
completely different. But I think that's kind of a good explanation as well. So it sounds then that it's about the architecture. It's not necessarily about like requiring a full new set of development skills per se.
Exactly. Exactly. And then once you move from, once you break things apart into working at smaller scales and interactive things, then you just naturally can just whatever makes the most sense, stitch it together. It also allows you to pick and choose your technologies. So say for instance, one team says, I really want to build something that's lightweight and using like say Redis as my store. And somebody else is like, we're all SQL Server. It really doesn't matter because each team can implement their own service in a way that makes the most sense, especially if you're working with containers, they have no impact on each other.
Mm.
So, you know what I mean? I can very easily say, boom, here's all my containers. And they just, I don't need to go and tell my ops department like, hey, I need you to set up a Redis cluster for me and I need it with this kind of scale and all that. I just build my Docker image and say, here it is. So,
Right. So then I guess that's sort of a logical next question is how do I know then where that dividing line is? How do I know how to start to divide up my application? How do I know what should be an individual microservice?
yeah. So my my best understanding from having actually talked to some teams that have had a lot of real success with this is focus on the business. So instead of approaching it from, hey, I'm using this technology here and this technology, instead say, hey, we're the billing team. We know everything about billing. We're the mapping team. For instance, I worked on site with the team. This was pre-COVID days, but I worked with this team for a week, and they were
We,
consultants.
we, we, we have like, BC and AD. We
I
need like
know, right?
PC now for like pre-COVID.
Yeah, exactly. So I worked on site with this team and I watched how they worked and it was fascinating. They were a consultant team that built support stuff for cellular phone provider. So, I have a phone from this provider, and it was cool seeing how they worked and cranked out a ton of stuff and like worldwide impact working with suppliers in other countries and all this stuff on small little teams and these relatively junior people, some people that were just fresh out of college, were having an impact on this, and it was amazing to see. But the way they broke it down was they had, hey, we're the billing team, we're the mapping team, we're the devices team, and that sort of thing. And then they stitch things together at that level. And then so then there's also the front end team, right? But the front end team is really just aggregating from these other services. So that is a great way to do it. There's also and Sean mentioned in the thing, there is a eShop on containers reference application. So there are some reference apps that will show, here's how we recommend doing things. Here's how we have seen teams have success. And there's some common patterns. And so you can definitely look at, some patterns. I'm going to have a logging service, or I'm going to have, like different, like an event hub or different sorts of things, right? So this is an example of an application. This is a store, but then they've got things broken down into, like this is the architecture they use, right? So they have an order microservice, a catalog microservice, identity, shopping basket. So those are the sorts of kind of things you can do on this website. Everything's pub sub integrated using Event Bus. And then you've got your front ends are also kind of micro things. You've got your web front end, you've got your mobile front end, et cetera. And then also you need to think about your support things. So then you have these back end like dashboards and logging, and different like webhooks and stuff. So those are kinds of conceptually how you can start breaking things apart.
Okay.
Um,
So
yeah.
you mentioned, so I want to kind of break this down a little bit. So you've got the identity microservice, so that would be somebody logging on the catalog microservice. So this is displaying out all the information. Ordering, then obviously that's where we're going to be making money. And I also notice
Mhm.
that you have a basket microservice as well. That's broken out, which I think is kind of interesting because like logically I would think, oh, ordering and my basket would probably go together, but I guess this kind of goes to show that you can even start to break those things apart as well.
Yeah, and it's true. The line blurs and how your order process for your business might be different. But in this case, I've got a basket microservice, and I could think of, say a company at a huge scale, you may have tons of people that are adding, removing things from their basket and may never place an order, or they may go through a bunch of churn on that before they actually go through the order process. And the order process also has to do things like say, is this a customer? And, like has more in-depth integration with the identity. And then also, if my basket loses something, that's a bummer. But it's not a financial impact. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not a huge. Whereas placing an order, if I lose an order, that's actually like people are financially liable and that kind of stuff. Also, with the order, you may have things like a financial, like actual
Mm.
transaction, credit card process, that sort of stuff. So in this case, you'll see there's different database backends. We've got SQL Server database as a relational data store for ordering.
Hmm.
And then our basket microservice is just Redis. It's a Redis cache. And that's more lightweight and fast. And it's like Redis is not, like if you're going to pick the most consistent database in the world, Redis is not going to be it, but it's okay. And the, or it's been judged to be okay for this case.
Right. I can absolutely see that, and obviously, chances are, if somebody's going to put an item into their cart, they're much more likely to buy it right then and there rather than coming
Yeah.
back to it 5 days later. And that if for whatever reason something did go wrong and we did wind up losing somebody's cart from 5 days ago, that's not necessarily the end of the world. If we lose somebody's order from 5 days ago, that's a bigger problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is now there are some obvious trade-offs because this is more complex than File New Project. And I actually brought up the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, CNCF. This is their landscape map. And
I'm
these are
hoping that you can
all,
make all of that a little smaller.
yeah, exactly, right? And the whole point of this, I think, is just to blow your mind with these are all the things. And this is part of why I don't feel bad about knowing all the stuff. For instance, one of the things that they include is a service mesh called Linkerd, and Linkerd is really cool, and it's a great like way to mesh your different services together, which can handle things like optimal routing and failover and scaling. But that's just one tiny square, right? And then I mean here's Kubernetes, which is like huge in this area, and they're just one square. So there's a lot of stuff, and I feel like that's a trade-off that you make in going into microservices is you gain all this scale, you gain both flexibility from your IT side, you also gain a lot of flexibility from your business and software development practices side, but like there's the complexity trade-off. And so I feel like making that move smoothly is probably one of the most important things. And that's why like some of the things that we focus on with our guidance, if you go to the .NET website, and here, let me just, so if we go to .NET, I want to show you how to find this thing, microservices. And then we've got this architecture guidance, and that'll take you in the docs, and it takes you to that eShop on containers. And then it also takes you to these like getting started. Here's, like, because just going in and trying to figure it all out from scratch, there's a lot. There's a lot to learn. So,
So
yeah, so I recommend for like if you're new to this stuff, I recommend the eShop on containers. I recommend going through in the like get started. And then one other area I recommend is we've got some great stuff these are interactive tutorials in the in Microsoft Docs. So this is the interactive Microsoft Learn stuff, and you can go through and actually create things. And what's cool with this is it actually uses Cloud Shell, and so you're provisioning things directly inside, like inside an Azure Cloud Shell, and it'll actually spin up multiple different things. So it actually provisions all this stuff for you in Azure, and it lets you interact with it like without having to separately deploy all the stuff.
Oh, interesting. So that there's a Learn module that will just automatically put that in place. So that way I can go ahead and start playing around with it and learn how all of those different pieces interact and work with one another without me having to take all of the time and stand all of that up myself.
Exactly. And I feel like I learn by looking at working code.
Yeah.
I like to see something running and I want to break it, or I want to go in and change the title of something, or I want to add a new product. And then I feel like, okay, conceptually now I'm kind of understanding what's going on. So there's a few ways
you can get
started.
throw that up one more time there, that learning path, just so that way I can grab the link and put that into chat here. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Here, wait, let me go back and I will grab. Here's the learning path. And I'm not sure the easiest way to get that.
Do you want to just do you want to just message that to me in Teams? I can go grab it from there.
Yeah, let me see.
Okay. Because unfortunately, I don't think you're allowed to post out links into the Twitch.
Okay,
so.
Teams is popping up on my. There it is. Of course, it's going to be shared.
Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and we'll get rid of that. There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's back. Okay. So good. All right. And here, business secrets and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I sent that one over.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely a good spot to get started with. There's a few ways that you can do this. So one is you can go through that and deploy it to Azure Cloud Shell, and it'll walk you through, and it does it for free. It creates like a temporary instance, and then it'll destroy it. You can also go through in the docs here, and it actually shows you how to get started. And you have to have Docker installed. And then you make sure that you've got, then you just basically clone the repo and you do Docker compose build and Docker compose up. I will warn you, let me grab my terminal here. It's non-trivial. So like, where's my, it took a while to run all this stuff, right? So it's actually going through configuring everything. These are the logs, like it's npm installing. It's the trade-off we always have with Microsoft tutorials is we can give you a really simple thing and then people say, well, that's not real world. Or we can give you a super complex thing and people say, this is super complex. So we generally try and give you both. We'll try and say, here's the easy hello world, and to do that I would recommend going through the this collection. And then if you want to actually see here's all the stuff, here's all the Docker files, here's all the wires and the guts and everything, then go through that other the Docker compose and like actually build it and run it locally and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have so many questions. I think I want to ask this first, which is, if I've already got a monolithic application, how do I begin the process of porting that over into microservices? Or is that maybe something I don't want to do? Or yeah.
So honestly, I could give guesses based on what I've done, but I would recommend going into like the architecture guidance stuff.
Okay.
And I would look. I think they have some like docs in here. So I would take a look at what they're actually going to recommend, because these are built, like for instance, Cesar built some stuff. My friend Nisha Nil has worked on some of these, and so these are like real things by real people that are doing this stuff in the real world. I can tell you the kind of stuff I've done, which is just increment. So there's a few ways to do migrations that I've seen successful that I've worked on. One is when you add on a new feature, build that new feature in the new way, right? So
Right.
you keep your existing system working, and then you say, hey, we're now adding on coupons. We'll say, great, we'll build a coupon service, and then we'll call over into it from our existing monolith. And so there's actually this thing called the strangler pattern,
Sean
which
actually just mentioned that.
perfect, yeah. So that's exactly it, and it's beautiful. It's so I think it's Martin Fowler, strangler. And so the idea with this is that basically it's built from the idea of like the strangler tree. Great, thank you for this. Scroll down to continue. So, but the idea is it's based on these like basically you just replace a thing at a time, and then pretty soon your monolith is not really doing much anymore. And
Okay.
then then it's easy to just say like decommission it. I've worked on projects where we did this exact thing where we said like, hey, we've got, for instance, as I was relatively new in software development, I worked on an application that was 30,000 ASP files on disk.
Yeah.
And it was because it was all, most of it was implemented by consultants. And so every time they just copied and pasted, that was the code reuse. And so then we said, okay, let's systematically deconstruct this. And so we said, okay, well, we'll build a CMS and we'll import this stuff. And as we build these new features, they'll use the CMS. And this was, we moved from classic ASP to .NET. And so we just had our new .NET website. We had our old website that consumed .NET services, and then we had our new .NET website that consumed from the, you know what I mean? You do a
Yeah.
step at a time.
No, that
So
that makes a
yeah.
lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. You highlighted, I think, something very important there, which you sort of alluded to a couple of times earlier about one great strength about microservices, which is the fact that you can bring in a junior dev and allow them to focus in on, okay, this is what we're going to do, and just how you do this. That because
Exactly.
I've been brought into projects in the past as well that have been just these huge monolithic applications
Mhm.
where there's just thousands and hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and like just
Mhm.
trying to figure out then where I'm supposed to inject something to add on a new feature or maybe to fix a bug, and
Yeah.
being almost just like scared for my life, knowing that
Yeah.
if I make a mistake, I'm going to break the build, or I'm going to break the entire application, or introduce some bug in a completely unexpected space. And of course, a lot of
Mhm.
times when you're talking about those types of applications, there's not near enough testing in place to
Yeah.
act as a safety net to catch any of that. So it sounds like then with microservices that it can abstract a lot of that away. And obviously, it doesn't make going in and updating things or making changes perfectly safe, but it can at least like mitigate some of the damage that somebody could do if
Mhm.
they do make a mistake. But also, to go on the positive side, it can also then, from what it sounds like, make it easier for somebody to figure out, oh, okay, this is how I can now incorporate a brand new feature, or this is how I can fix a bug, or this is now how I can like do meaningful work here and not just be
Exactly.
relegated to going to get coffee for the entire staff.
Well, and exactly. And a lot of the things you're talking about there, like, okay, it's scary to work on this big application because I can't understand it, because it's not all tested, because there's all these interactions, I'm not sure of what's going on. By splitting things out into microservices, those things all get solved, right? Because I can understand a small little chunk of code. I can also more easily test something. If I tell you, hey, I've got this huge monolith and I want you to add tests to all of it, well, I'm not going to do that. But if you say, hey, here's this one service and here's the business rules, it calculates these things or it goes out and gets this stuff, I can pretty easily both write tests for it and mock it. I can write like a fake service or whatever, and I can write failovers and all those sorts of things. I can also write health checks for it.
Mm.
So, and health checks is a really cool thing as part, like, you do introduce some possible things that can go wrong when you bring in microservices. If one of the microservices fails, like there's more points, and the service can fail because it's a dependency fails because another microservice it depends on fails, all these different things. So fortunately, both so Docker has support for health checks, Kubernetes has support for health checks, and ASP.NET Core has support for health checks. And so what a health check can do is you can say, here's a URL you can hit on my service, or here's a way you can ping my service. If the service is healthy, it will return healthy, or it'll return a number of something or whatever. It'll return something. So this is an internal, thing that I can ping. So what's nice with that is Docker and Kubernetes and other monitoring systems can ping that service, and the service, if the service doesn't respond, well, it's dead. So restart it. If it does respond but says, hey, I'm slow, or I'm degraded or whatever, again, we can manage that, right? So you can automate all that stuff as well.
Okay.
So, yeah. So what's cool with that is, like you were saying, like, hey, I could be worried about breaking something. Well, even something like I introduced a change as a new young developer on the team, and now I've degraded the service. Well, we can actually automatically monitor and roll that back and stuff too. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And, Heroja highlights, perhaps noteworthy, that building a distributed monolith is not doing microservices. So
Yeah.
just taking a monolithic application and having, I've got a server and I've got a client, that's not what we're talking about when it comes to microservices.
Yeah, and so then this is where you do start to get into the patterns, and I really, and again, I'm like pulling from what I've been reading and watching and stuff, but the most important stuff is to think about the business, think about the different business units, and then build things that support those different business units. One thing that's great with that too is it's much easier to have your actual business, the person that knows your business, the business representative, work directly with the small team. So the billing business person is good friends with the PM, or the team lead for that microservice just for billing, right?
It's funny because you mentioned Martin Fowler earlier, which I'll admit, like, that's it. He's a longtime idol of mine, but that's a name that I haven't heard in forever. And then you mentioned something else that I think kind of works as a little bit of a callback for anybody who's watching. That knows really kind of what agile development is all about, and is maybe old enough to remember like extreme programming, where one of the core concepts there is you were supposed to have a business user that was literally sitting in the room with all of the developers. And obviously, that doesn't actually happen, but that was, one of the tenets of extreme programming. And so it sounds like by breaking things down into microservices, while we're not necessarily going to take somebody, off the floor, so to speak, and put them into the room with developers, it does at the very least sound like it will make it easier for those types of conversations that can happen, because now I have a product manager, now I have a developer lead whose sole job, whose sole responsibility is to manage then the ordering system, let's say, or sole job is to manage the cart system. And so they can then go work with the business owner for just that specific part, and have a really good relationship and know how to do that really well, and then make sure that it's implemented properly, it's implemented with all the appropriate business rules and everything else.
Exactly. And you have this great interaction. And again, I've been on these calls with customers, and as they're talking with the business unit, and they'd say, hey, we're rolling out this new product line. And they'd say, great, okay, here's how we can do this. And did you know our system can support this or that? Because they're able to be that familiar with that part of the business. So whereas before I would work in teams where it was like, hey, we're the front end team, we're the data services team, we're the whatever optimization, next gen team. And it's like, okay, who does billing talk to, and who really understands billing?
Nobody understands billing.
Yeah. Well, that's a problem too. I do have one other thing that I'm excited about, if
Yeah.
I can jump over to. So I talked about all the stuff with, all our guidance and all that stuff, and we'll tell you all the building blocks and stuff. One thing that I think is really neat, and it's an experimental tool at this point still, but it's something from the .NET team, and this is called Project Ty. And this evolved from uh, people on the .NET team saying, hey, let's build some microservices. Let's understand what our customers are doing when they spin up a Kubernetes cluster, what they understand when they build out and architect an application. And the thing that they found is that it's a pain in the neck, but some of the real things that they ran into was file new microservices is hard. It's just because I showed all the concepts, and and you're worried about, if I set it up wrong, what do I do now? Like, how do I fix it? How do I avoid making mistakes? So what Project Ty does is make it very easy to take a few little .NET applications and instrument them in microservices. Because let's say I build a front end and a back end. So I think actually
You build a front end and a back end.
Yes, I have the world's smallest microservices application, right? So let me see if I can zoom this in.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're doing there.
Yeah.
Let's say. Okay, so here.
Control plus, Control plus.
Yeah, let me see if this actually works. Control plus. It's not doing it. Oh, okay. Window plus. Oh dear. There it is. Oh, it's all going crazy.
That's not what we want.
It sure isn't. Let me. Now I've destroyed everything. Window escape. Let me talk about what's here.
Well, go ahead and leave it up in just so that way there's at least some level of code to look like. It's weird that Control Plus isn't working.
Yeah. Okay. So here. So the reason is.
There we go.
There it is. What did I do wrong before? So here I have a front end and a back end.
It might have been that the window didn't have focus. Windows gets me on that all the time. Like I'll go grab a window and then it will magically lose focus.
Yeah, which is neat. The whole concept of focus is weird, and also I find like explaining to people that aren't super computer users, like what even is focus and why did the button do this time and didn't another time.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm talking down to non-computer users when I couldn't operate my computer.
Yeah.
Okay, so here in this application, I've got a back end, and this back end has just a simple API, and it's just going to be returning like a here. Let me see. This is a weather service. Then on my front end is consuming from the weather service, and so if I run this, well, the point is there's some stuff we've got to do. The back end and front end have to be able to talk to each other.
Right.
So the front end has to be able to say, how do I find my back end? So what's neat with this Project Ty thing is it helps set up some of that stuff for you. So let me go over here.
Okay, so what I'm seeing there is it looks like you're mapping up an endpoint then, so you're just making a straight HTTP call, that it's being abstracted away a little bit in there.
Yeah, exactly. So the point here is if I do create a new front end and I create a new back end, how do the two find each other? How do I also configure stuff like secrets, like my back end may talk to a database, and where do I store that information? And and as we think about some of those more complex applications, there's tons of secret management, there's tons of networking configuration, and I want to do that as late in my dev process as possible, right? Also, I run into other problems with if each of these is deployed in a separate Docker container. Now, when I want to debug my application, I have to attach to that Docker container to debug it, right? And again, if I've got a dozen different services, now I'm trying to manage connecting, because each one is a separate container. It's not, how do I debug these complex distributed applications? So with Project Ty, and again, I'll do the Control Plus. Here I did, typed Ty run. So I can have a front end and a back end. And then when I install Project Ty, which is just a global tool. So it's, like any like npm global tool or .NET global tool. And then I can say Ty run. And what's neat with Ty is it will inspect the solution, the .NET solution, and then it'll find the projects that are listed in there. And then it'll say, okay, I know how to launch and manage and run those applications. So what's kind of neat with this is
And so that's
now
the solution that you mentioned there. That's the SLN file that would be
exactly.
used for the .NET project. Okay, okay.
Yep. So here's something that's kind of neat. Now let me make sure, speaking of focus, that I have the right one. But okay. So now if I go and click on this, control click to follow link, which is a neat thing, it's actually created this dashboard for me, right? So I didn't do anything other than do Ty run, and Ty run is actually like inspecting and finding that. So now let's go and I'll click on the front end, and here's my front end, and it's just a very simple, doing nothing thing. But here, if I click on logs, it actually shows it's got a log thing, right? And I can actually also, I can go in and I can say, what's all the metrics? What's it running and doing? So just by the fact of just running this in Project Ty, it's kind of setting all that stuff up. It also does some stuff like it creates environment variables for each part of the service. So now if my front end needs to find to the back end, it just says, go read the environment variable. I want back end connection. And it'll tell it, well, here's what the actual back end connection is. So like here, it's actually like launching it using those settings. So this is kind of the world's simplest one. There's some more complex examples, and it's really neat how well it kind of scales up to do this. So let me pop over and see if I can.
Is it spinning all of that up inside of Docker that you have installed locally, or how is it hosting all of those services?
Yeah, excellent question. So
Thank you. I thought of it all by myself.
As this is running, I will answer the question so that I can properly multitask. Whoa, here I did. I hit escape. Now I don't even know. Okay, Ty run. Wonderful. Okay. So it actually does a pretty clever thing. It doesn't Dockerize the .NET projects until it needs to. And the reason it does that is so that I can test them and debug them locally using all my tools, right? So I can use any kind of like Visual, if I'm running this in Visual Studio or whatever, I can set my breakpoints and debug directly into them. Everything else, it is Dockerizing and running them. So you'll actually see here, it's using Postgres for this example. And so it's just it's setting and it's running that from Docker. It's pulling those Docker images.
Okay. Now, is it able to do that with, let's say I was using Node or I was using, I don't know, PHP. Is it able to run that without Dockerizing it, or is it only able to run .NET without Dockerizing it?
So right now, it's just the .NET parts that it runs without Dockerizing. Everything else, though, that's kind of the safety hatch, is anything else that I want to, and there's some samples in here that have like, complex, like an Angular or whatever front end. We're using multiple different things, and it just pulls those as Docker images. Okay. So, and one thing that's really cool here too with this one, so this is running a more complex one, and we'll see here. So there, I've got front end. I've got Redis, I've got a worker, I've got Postgres as a database, I've got a results, which is another thing, and then I've got ingress to allow pointing into this from externally. So this is how I would kind of put my front end on top of all these services. And so what's neat here is like, as I go into this, I can see, here's my thing. I can vote. Are you a dogs or a cats person?
Oh, come on.
All right, so we'll vote for cats for you. Yes, kidding.
Troll.
Okay. Right. So here we can go and we can see all the logs and stuff, and this also can integrate in as well with like identity. We can front that with all that stuff, and we can actually trace this through. We can also go in and very easily pull in additional, and there's some cool samples that take just a little bit too long to show for this, but you can actually go in and very easily pull in another Docker container that has things like more advanced dashboards that'll show the full like tracing and diagnostics and all that. So this what I like about this is if you're somebody, if you are more of a .NET developer first and you're like, hey, I want to get started with microservices and I want to learn the stuff I need to learn, but I don't want to try and learn everything before I can even get started. I like this as a way to kind of get started quickly. You know what I mean? And so I can say, hey, I'm a .NET developer. I got a front end and a back end. I want to bring in, Postgres and Redis. And I heard about this cool, linkered system for service mesh, and I want to pull that in too. I can do that without having to go out and, read docs for 6 hours first. So does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And it's very lightweight too, so I can just shut this down. It's very quick to kind of spin up and spin down. This actually, and I just updated this today. You can do you can pull from the repo, and then the getting started. And by the way, I always call this out. I think this team has done one of the best jobs with documentation I've seen in a while from any new project. They have really good getting started docs. They have a really friendly walkthrough. So here I do install .NET tool install, and then I can go to any of the directories and I can just say run and it'll run.
That's awesome.
So let me see if I'm not sure.
And it's worth highlighting that will run on Linux or a Mac as well, because .NET is cross-platform open source.
Exactly. And I actually, so a few cool things with this. Yes, I actually was going to originally do my demos on Mac, and I was just like, I'll just work. I do most of my screencast stuff on Windows. And I was like, I'll keep it to one machine. But I have to talk, like this past weekend, I did a conference presentation from my Mac, exact same thing. And that's because .NET's cross-platform, Docker's cross-platform, it's all cross-platform, and it doesn't really make any kind of difference.
That's awesome. I love it. Of course, I would just be doing it with WSL on my Windows box, but that's a different conversation.
And so Docker is actually on my machine, it's using WSL too.
Right.
Which is pretty neat. Yeah. So here, this one I think is also kind of fun. I mentioned the whole thing of liveliness and readiness and health checks earlier. And so this is an example of a sample that has those health checks. And it's actually able to go in, and I think on this one, it's kind of small here, but it says this one's moving to a healthy state and then a ready state. So healthy means it's alive, don't restart it, but it's not yet ready to serve traffic. And then ready state is like, bring it on, I'm ready for your traffic. So it's really cool with these samples. They'll go through and show like those sorts of things, and you can actually like, there's other examples where they go through and they show you how to turn on these dashboards and watch as things are going through, and you can see like, oh, this one failed and this one picked it up and stuff. So
okay, yeah. I dig that. I love that dashboard, just because it makes it so much easier then for me to visualize and see everything that I've got running. Like, I do a fair bit of development with Azure Static Web Apps, which I love and adore. But it winds up creating, you have a front end and then you have a back end that's using Azure Functions. And so like even doing something simple like that, what you wind up doing is spinning up two separate processes, because you need one that's going to be, when you're doing it locally, because you need one that's hosting your local files, your client files, and then you need something that's going to be running the functions. And just like even doing that is a little bit of a pain. And so having a dashboard like that just goes, hey, here's everything, and then just like in one-stop shopping gives you all the URLs and everything else that you need. That can't be overstated, how wonderful that is.
It's the kind of thing where usually like either you do it the first day, so you waste a day setting up all the infrastructure, or you don't do it for 6 months and every day you hate yourself because you have to go through and you're like, oh, what was that URL again? And I should just fix this thing. So this is a great like balance of it does it for you. I want to show one other really neat thing. And this is, I mentioned the tracing kind of stuff here.
We got about 3 minutes.
Okay, well, here's an example of
Yeah.
a tutorial where it actually shows all that. And this literally is like, you add this code to your configuration. So there's a Thai YAML file, and then it shows all this really cool like diagnostic stuff. So these are multiple, you have a front end calling into a back end, you're able to trace timings, you're able to trace failures, all this cool stuff. So to kind of wrap up on this, Project Thai, it's experimental, it's a developer tool. So while it is experimental, I use it right now because it generates standard Docker files, it generates all the kind of standard stuff. So I can use it to get started quickly with microservices. And then I can go and I can do the kind of like, I'm ready to deploy, and here's the, I break out the books and, do, and also I should mention that these, this Microsoft Learn content will also take you through the stuff of using Azure Kubernetes Service and, Azure Container Registry, et cetera. So this is the like deploy to Azure kind of stuff there as well.
That's perfect. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and share that that link out one more time. So that's what you would recommend for like next steps of where people can go to find out more than about microservices.
Exactly. And we've got some new stuff we're working on this month, actually, inside the .NET and content teams where we're and a community team. And so we'll probably have like a roll-up blog post at the end of the month with like, here's all the stuff for learning microservices. But definitely just, if you go to the .NET site and then you click on microservices, that should be like, this is going to be the place where we're going to have all the newest links for you always.
I love it. That's perfect. Jon, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. It's always great just to hang out and to chat. I always learn so much from you. So yeah, thanks for taking the time talking about microservices. If you're not already following Jon Galloway on Twitter, you should. At Jon Galloway, you can see that right up above his head. So yeah, Jon, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. This is a ton of fun.
And yeah, for everybody that's tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in. We're here every week, every Wednesday, because after all, it's a Web Wednesday. And next week we're going to be chatting a little bit about React and state management in React, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, come check that out. That will be next week. But in the meantime, yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a good one.
Thanks a bunch, Christopher.
Bye. There we go.